I still remember the morning the world came crashing down around me like a sudden vicious storm that hit without warning. I had just finished my morning coffee and was making my way toward the kitchen when my phone buzzed. The familiar ringtone felt like a lifeline my son Nathan was calling. I smiled, thinking he'd just need a few more dollars for rent, or maybe another favor. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. When I picked up, it was Emily's voice on the other end, calm, almost cold. "Oh, Catherine, we got married yesterday," she said. I froze. My chest tightened. My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean you got married?" I thought. I had spent years, 3 years, paying for their life, for their dreams, for their comforts. I had stood by their side through every hardship, paid their rent when they couldn't afford it, furnished their apartment with the last of my savings, and stocked their fridge when they were too proud to ask for help. I had supported them, loved them, and yet for this one most important event in Nathan's life, I was nothing. Emily's words hung in the air, sharp and final. "We only invited special people." Special people. The words slammed into me like ice water. I stood there holding the phone as if it had become an anchor weighing me down. My legs felt heavy. My thoughts were clouded. How could this be happening? My own son, my only son, had excluded me. How did I not know? How did I not matter enough to be there on the most significant day of his life? As I stood in my living room, the echoes of Emily's words rang in my ears, and I felt a coldness creep up my spine. Nathan's absence on the call said everything. I could feel his eyes avoiding mine, as if he too was ashamed, as if he knew what this would do to me but couldn't find the courage to speak up. I had poured everything into making sure their lives were comfortable, believing that one day they would care for me just as I had cared for them. But it wasn't supposed to be like this, not in a million years. I looked around the room, the very room I had spent hours decorating, buying furniture piece by piece, making sure it was a home they could live in with pride. That living room, the one I had filled with love and sacrifice, suddenly felt foreign to me. The sofa where I had sat many nights waiting for Nathan to come home now seemed like a symbol of my own isolation. I stood there in silence, my fingers tight around the phone, my chest tightening with each passing second. Then Emily's voice sliced through the thick silence again, pulling me from my thoughts. "We're sorry, Catherine, but it was just intimate. You know how it is. Intimate." How intimate could it have been when they had chosen to keep me out of the picture entirely? The gown I had carefully selected for their wedding, the shoes I bought for myself, now hung uselessly in my closet, an embarrassing reminder of my place in their lives or lack thereof. I had spent weeks planning, preparing, and saving. I had called my sister Diana, told her the good news, shared how proud I was to be part of such an important moment. And now, this. Tears stung my eyes, but I quickly blinked them away. No, I will not cry. Not yet. Not in front of them. I had spent too many years being the strong one, the silent one, the woman who never asked for anything in return for the love and sacrifices she made. I had put Nathan's needs above my own, always hoping, always giving, and now this. It felt like a betrayal that went deeper than any material loss. This wasn't just about money or gifts. It was about love, real love. The kind of love I thought I had from my son and daughter-in-law. The truth was crashing down on me. All this time, I had been fooled into believing that the love I offered was enough, that it would be returned in kind. But love wasn't measured in dollars and sacrifices, and I had learned that too late. As I held the phone in my hand, the words, "special people," echoed like a haunting refrain in my head, and I felt a hollow emptiness deep inside. I was no longer part of their world. And in that single moment, I realized my heart sank deeper than I ever thought possible, that I had never truly been. I was just a means to an end. The rent paid, the groceries bought, the furniture delivered. The woman who could be counted on, no questions asked, because I had no choice but to give. I went into the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had sat for so many quiet mornings, waiting for Nathan to come over, hoping for a visit, a phone call. But now I knew it would never be the same. How could it be? They had built their lives on my generosity, my devotion, my ability to turn a blind eye when they asked for more. And now, standing in my own home, surrounded by the echoes of my sacrifices, I felt more alone than I had in all my years of widowhood. More alone than when I buried my husband Robert. More alone than I had ever imagined. The silence in the room seemed to stretch out for eternity. My gaze drifted to the pale pink dress hanging in my closet, the one I had bought with such care, imagining how I would look in photos, how proud I would be to stand beside Nathan and Emily on their wedding day. Instead, I stood alone holding the phone, watching my son avoid my eyes, as if he was ashamed to face me. And I knew deep down I would never be part of their life the way I had dreamed. I put the phone down slowly, my fingers numb. A heavy weight settled in my chest, a feeling of loss that didn't belong to a wedding, but to something far more fundamental. My place in their lives had been erased. I was no longer special, and the sting of that reality made the room feel smaller, colder. I didn't know what hurt more, the wedding I had been excluded from, or the realization that I had been giving and giving, expecting nothing but love in return, and that love had never truly existed. The world outside my house continued on, but in that moment, I felt like an outsider in my own life. And the worst part was that I didn't know how to fix it. The days that followed that gut-wrenching phone call were an endless blur of confusion and disbelief. I couldn't bring myself to face the truth about Nathan and Emily, at least not for a while. I pretended I didn't notice the silence in the house, the eerie absence of the voices I had once loved. I told myself it was just a mistake, a misunderstanding, that they would come to their senses and apologize. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had been nothing but a resource to them, a means to an end. The real damage, the deep betrayal, started to sink in when the phone rang again, this time just a week after the wedding announcement. I'd been dreading the call, but I didn't think it would come so soon. When I saw Emily's name on the caller ID, my stomach churned. It had been days since I had spoken to her. She hadn't reached out to check on me, and Nathan hadn't even bothered to send a simple message. They had forgotten me, and it was no accident. Catherine Emily's voice was softer this time, almost pleading. "We need to talk." My throat tightened. I knew exactly where this was going, but I braced myself anyway. I couldn't hang up on her. I couldn't seem to do anything but listen. I stayed silent as she continued. "It's the rent, Catherine. She paused, almost like she was choosing her words carefully. "We didn't expect it to be this tight this month. The landlord is saying we need to pay or he's going to start the eviction process. I know you've always been there for us, but..." She trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. "Can you make the payment?" Just this once, I could feel my blood begin to boil slowly, as if something inside of me was finally waking up. Just this once. Again. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. I've always been there for them. How many times had I been there? How many times had I rushed to the bank, emptied my account just to give them what they asked for without a word of thanks or acknowledgement? "Lena, how much do you need?" I managed to ask, my voice hollow, as if my heart had been replaced with ice. $1,000, she said, her voice sweet, the words flowing with practiced ease. "But Catherine, we're just in a tight spot. Things will get better once Nathan's business picks up. You know how hard he's been working, and this is just temporary. We promise." It wasn't the first time I'd heard this either. Every promise felt like an empty echo. It was always temporary, but it had been 3 years. 3 years of temporary. I had given them everything I had, every dollar, every spare hour of my life. I'd seen them take the money I offered with a smile, but I never saw it returned in any meaningful way. They needed it more than I did, right? They needed it to get by, to build their future. So I gave and kept on giving. This time, something inside of me snapped. I could feel it, the years of resentment and disappointment bubbling up from the pit of my stomach. I had been so willing to do everything for them to make their lives easier, but when it came to my need for support, or even simple acknowledgement, they were nowhere to be found. I was a walking bank account to them, nothing more, nothing less. I can't, I said, finally with more firmness than I expected. I've given you enough, Lena. You've taken enough. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Emily's breath hitch, her frustration rising. Catherine, she started, her voice more desperate now. Please, don't do this. We've always been there for you, haven't we? We're just asking for a little help. You're like a second mother to me, you know that. That familiar, sweet tone. You're like a second mother to me. That was always the line she used when she needed something. Always. It was like a veil of comfort she draped over me, hoping to make me forget the harsh reality that she and Nathan had taken advantage of me at every turn. But I was done. The weight of that phrase, the manipulative charm, finally broke through the haze of denial I had been in for so long. No, I said, my voice now steady. You're not getting it, Emily. I'm not your bank anymore. You and Nathan are grown adults, and it's time you start acting like it. I hung up the phone with a shaky hand, but I felt lighter, relieved even. A strange sense of power surged through me, one I hadn't felt in years. For once, I was choosing me over them. I had made the decision I'd been too afraid to make. But with that relief came a deep gnawing ache, one I knew would stay with me for a long time. Was it really that simple? The reality of what I had just done hit me full force. I had just told my son's wife no. I had just rejected their demands for money. I had cut them off, and the thought made me feel both empowered and empty. It was as if I had severed a lifeline, one I had depended on for so long, one that had become the core of my identity: mother, provider, caretaker. But none of that mattered anymore. It had never mattered to them. Over the next few days, I could feel the ripple effect of my decision. The silence was louder now, even though they hadn't called me. There were no more messages, no desperate texts asking for help. They had stopped coming by too, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel obligated to rush to the door to greet them or to feel guilty if I couldn't. But the silence wasn't just a lack of communication. It was a void I had spent my life filling, a void I had created by placing everyone's needs above my own. Without them, the house felt emptier than ever. The walls echoing with the weight of years spent in the background of their lives. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my identity, my sense of purpose. I had given so much expecting love in return, but all I had received was indifference. As the days wore on, the anger began to creep in, slow and steady. I had given up everything, my savings, my retirement plans, my comfort, all to help them. And now they were treating me like a stranger. My own son, the one I had nurtured from birth, had abandoned me for the promise of a comfortable life, one built on my sacrifices. The house I had worked so hard to create, to make beautiful for them, was now a cold, empty place. I thought about the times I had walked into their apartment with bags of groceries, the times I had handed them cash without a second thought, convinced that this was what a good mother did. I thought about the wedding, the dress I had bought for it, the shoes that would never touch the floor of their ceremony, and the hope that I had wasted on them. I had hoped they would come to me, ask for my blessing, my approval, but they hadn't. And now they weren't even asking for my love. They were just asking for more. It was as if they had always been manipulating me, using me, and I had been too blind to see it. But no more. That was it. I was done. Done with the emotional manipulation, done with the guilt, done with being used. That night, I sat down at my desk with a piece of paper, and I started to make a list a list of all the things I had done for them over the past 3 years. The rent payments, the groceries, the loans, the gifts. When I finished, I looked at the number in front of me, over $30,000. $30,000 I had given no questions asked, no expectations in return. And for what? To be excluded from my own son's wedding, to be left out of the most important day of his life? The realization hit me harder than I expected. I had sacrificed more than just money. I had sacrificed myself, my dignity, my sense of worth, and I couldn't do it anymore. I closed the notebook with a snap and leaned back in my chair, the weight of everything I had just calculated pressing down on my chest. I felt lighter, stronger, but also broken. It was time to fight for myself. For once, to stop being the woman who just gave and to start being the woman who took back what was mine. The days after that phone call felt like the calm before a storm, the air thick with tension. I spent them in a strange limbo, uncertain whether what I had done, telling Emily and Nathan no, was the right choice. My hands shook every time the phone rang, my heart skipping a beat, expecting it to be either one of them demanding money or trying to manipulate me into giving in. But it didn't come. No phone calls, no texts. It was as if they had evaporated into thin air, leaving me behind in a sea of silence that only grew louder with each passing day. I spent my days in the house walking through the rooms where I had made so many sacrifices, the same house where I had cooked their meals, fixed their problems, and provided them with comfort. I thought about the dress I had bought for their wedding, the shoes that would never be worn. I thought about the groceries I had bought, the rent I had paid, the thousands of dollars I had poured into their lives, and all of it, I realized, had been for nothing. I spent one morning sitting at the kitchen table staring at the walls, wondering what had happened to the woman I used to be, the woman who had dreamed of a peaceful retirement, the woman who had wanted to spend her final years surrounded by love and companionship, not constant requests for money. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being me and started being the bank, the problem solver, the woman who never said no. I had given so much of myself to Nathan and Emily, expecting nothing in return. But what had I received? A wedding invitation that never came, a phone call that ended with me being told I wasn't special enough. And now I realized that was the hardest truth of all. I had never been special enough for them. My sacrifices, my unconditional love, had never been enough. I wasn't important enough to be there on their wedding day. I wasn't important enough to be seen as anything more than a source of money. The anger inside me began to simmer, quiet but relentless. But beneath the anger, there was something else too. Something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. For the first time in years, I saw everything clearly. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even just about the wedding. It was about the years I had spent sacrificing myself for a son who at the core didn't value me. I had given him everything I had, emotionally, financially, believing that one day he would love me for it. But the truth was, he never had, not in the way I had hoped. And Emily, with her sweet smile and her soothing words, had been the perfect accomplice in this game of emotional manipulation. It wasn't just about the money I had given them. It was about the power they had over me, the power they took without even asking. And I had let it happen. I had allowed them to manipulate me into giving, until there was nothing left of the woman I used to be. I had been so consumed with the need to be needed that I had forgotten the most important lesson of all: I mattered. I mattered more than anything I could give to them. That was the turning point. I walked into the living room where I had spent countless hours waiting for Nathan to come over, waiting for him to visit, waiting for some sign that I was important to him. I ran my fingers over the furniture I had bought for them, the sofas, the chairs, the tables. They had all been bought with love, with the hope that one day they would be grateful for everything I had done. But now I understood something else. Their gratitude wasn't real, and neither was their love. They had used me not just for my money, but for my attention, for my care, for my willingness to give. They had taken everything, and now it was time for me to take something back. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my checkbook, something I hadn't done in months. My hands were steady now, no longer trembling with fear or guilt. I had spent so long living for them, living in their world, that I had forgotten how to live for myself. But I would not be afraid anymore. I would not be controlled. This was my life, my future, and it was time to take control of it. The list of all the things I had given them, the loans, the rent, the groceries, the gifts, it was staggering. I had given away over $30,000 in the past 3 years. $30,000. Money I could have used for my retirement money, I could have saved for the future I had always dreamed of. But instead, I had handed it over piece by piece with the hope that one day it would be enough. But it wasn't. It would never be enough. I made the decision then in that quiet, still room. I would stop. I would stop giving. I would stop sacrificing. I would stop being the one who always said yes. And when Emily called again, and I knew she would, I would say no. The phone rang that afternoon as if on cue. My heart skipped a beat, but this time I didn't panic. I didn't brace myself for the manipulation that was sure to follow. I answered it, my voice steady, my resolve firm. Catherine Emily's voice was sweet, but there was a slight edge of desperation in it now. We really need your help with the rent. Nathan's been working so hard, and we're just asking for a little help. Please, I could almost hear the practiced sorrow in her tone. I could almost feel her reaching for that emotional lever she had used so many times before. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't feel the tug of guilt. I didn't feel the pull to say yes as I had so many times in the past. Emily, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've given you enough. I've given you everything I had, and I can't do it anymore. You and Nathan need to learn how to take care of yourselves. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Emily's breath catch. She was surprised. She wasn't used to me saying no. She had always known that I would give, always known that I would come through for them. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. The woman who had been desperate for their approval, for their love, was gone. And in her place was a woman who knew her worth. But Catherine, she said, her voice shifting, turning desperate, you've always been there for us. We need you now. I could hear it in her voice, the panic, the fear. She could feel control slipping from her fingers. And it felt good. No, Emily, I said. You don't need me. You've never needed me. Not really. You've just needed what I could give you. And I'm done. I'm not your bank. I'm not your ATM. And I'm not your emotional punching bag anymore. It's time you both learn how to live without me. I hung up the phone, and for a moment I sat there in silence, the weight of what I had just done sinking in. I wasn't sure if I was proud of myself or terrified of what might come next. But I knew one thing: I had taken back control of my life. I had reclaimed my power. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The weeks that followed were a strange, surreal kind of peace. I still heard from Emily and Nathan text messages, phone calls, pleading requests for help. But I didn't respond. I didn't answer. I didn't give them the satisfaction of knowing they could still manipulate me. Every call that went unanswered, every text left without a reply, brought me closer to the woman I wanted to be. And as the days passed, I realized something even more profound. I had spent so long living for others that I had forgotten how to live for myself. Now it was my turn. It was my turn to enjoy life. It was my turn to spend money on things I wanted, not things I thought others needed. It was my turn to be the person I had always dreamed of being. That was the moment I knew I had won. The battle wasn't over, but the war had been won. And now, for the first time in years, I was finally living for me. The days after that phone call passed slowly, but not in the way I expected. When I hung up on Emily, the weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, and yet I felt a strange lightness. For the first time in years, I wasn't scrambling to accommodate their demands, fighting to make up for the neglect that had quietly eroded my sense of self. I thought that perhaps Nathan and Emily would process what had happened and in time come to understand why I'd cut them off. I even allowed myself to believe for a brief moment that they might apologize, maybe even attempt to make amends. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. I knew better than to expect anything from them except the same manipulative behavior I had endured for so long. I could already feel the storm brewing on the horizon, and I wasn't wrong. It came like a thunderclap in the dead of night, the kind that leaves you no time to prepare. A week after my final firm no to their requests, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Emily, it was Nathan. His voice was strained, almost tight with anxiety, something I had never heard before. His usual arrogance, the air of entitlement that always followed him, was absent. There was a sense of panic in his tone, and I braced myself for what was coming. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice unusually calm, but carrying an edge I didn't recognize. "Emily and I were really worried about you. You've been acting strange lately. With everything going on, we think it might be time for you to get some help. I'm going to need you to see someone. I had expected many things, but this was beyond what I had anticipated. A part of me wanted to laugh, to acting strange. Was he really using this line? The very same person who had never once asked how I was doing. The one who had taken every cent I gave him without a second thought was now suddenly concerned for my well-being. The audacity, the manipulation. It was all too much. "What are you talking about, Nathan?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was racing in my chest. "What do you mean by getting help?" "Well," he hesitated, his voice wavering. "We've been thinking about it, and Emily and I talked to a lawyer. We're concerned about your mental state, Mom. We think maybe you're not capable of handling things on your own anymore. We've seen the signs. You've been isolating yourself. And the money, you've stopped sending it. We just want to make sure you're okay, that you're safe. We've arranged for someone to assess you. A professional." I sat in silence, the world around me spinning. My mind reeled as I processed his words. They were questioning my mental state. They were trying to have me evaluated as if I were some helpless old woman who had lost all sense of clarity. The same people who had drained me emotionally, financially, and psychologically were now trying to play the role of concerned family members. It was sickening. I had been a mother to them, giving every ounce of love, care, and support I had, and now they were calling me crazy. "You're concerned about me. You've never been concerned about me before." I said, my voice low and steady. I refused to let the anger take control, not yet. I had to stay calm. This was just another attempt to manipulate me to make me look like I was unfit to manage my own life. "Nathan, I'm not crazy. I know exactly what's going on. You and Emily have spent the last 3 years using me. You don't get to suddenly act like you care about me now, not after everything you've taken." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Nathan's wheels turning, trying to figure out how to respond, how to regain control of the conversation. When he spoke again, his voice was tight defensive. "I know this is hard, Mom, but you need to understand. We're just trying to protect you. This isn't about the money. We're doing what's best for you. We've already made arrangements with a doctor. He's going to come by tomorrow just to check in. It's the best thing for everyone. You'll see." He didn't give me a chance to respond before he hung up. My hands shook as I slowly placed the phone back on the table. I felt sick. A doctor. They were bringing in a professional to assess me, to decide whether or not I was mentally competent to make my own decisions. I couldn't breathe. My world felt like it was tilting off its axis. They were trying to take control of me. They were trying to take my life from me piece by piece, just as they had taken my money. The next day, my house felt like a prison. I couldn't escape the sense of impending doom that clung to every inch of the space. I stayed inside watching the clock, knowing that the assessment was coming, knowing that they were orchestrating this carefully calculated move to strip me of my autonomy. I tried to distract myself to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, but the dread gnawed at me. Then at precisely 10:00 a.m., there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and standing in front of me was a man in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. He looked like someone straight out of a courtroom drama, and my stomach twisted. "Mrs. Richter," he asked, his voice smooth, professional. "I'm Dr. Coleman. I've been sent by your family to conduct a mental health assessment." My heart sank. I knew in that moment that I was about to be forced into something I had no control over. It wasn't about my well-being. It was about Nathan and Emily making sure they could take my finances, my life. "I'm not doing this," I said firmly, stepping back from the door, not allowing him to enter. "I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. I don't need an evaluation, and I'm not signing anything." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting resistance. "Ma'am, your family has expressed concern for your health. I'm just here to assess the situation. It's in your best interest." "No," I said, again my voice more forceful this time. "It's in your best interest to stay out of my house. I am not some helpless old woman to be evaluated by a stranger. If Nathan and Emily really cared about me, they wouldn't be doing this. They wouldn't be trying to take control of my life. They wouldn't be turning my own son against me." "Doctor," Coleman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I understand this is difficult, but your family has requested this, and no." I repeated, "Leave now." He stood there for a long moment as if weighing his options, but I stood my ground, and eventually he nodded, turning to leave. The moment the door closed behind him, I collapsed against it, breathing heavily. They weren't just trying to control my money anymore. They were trying to control me, to declare me mentally incompetent so they could steal my life and my freedom. They were willing to go to any lengths, hiring professionals, spreading lies, manipulating the system, all to get what they wanted. But this time, they had underestimated me. I had been a mother, a provider, a caretaker, and I had done everything for them. But I was done. I was no longer their ATM, their safety net, their emotional crutch. I knew what I had to do next. This fight was just beginning. I wasn't going to let them take me without a fight. They had no idea what they had awakened in me. For the first time in years, I was going to fight for myself. That night, I sat down with my lawyer, a woman named Sarah, who had helped me with some paperwork years ago. She was kind, sharp, and professional, and she knew what was at stake. We discussed the events of the day, the so-called evaluation, and Sarah didn't hesitate. "You've been through a lot, Mrs. Richter," she said, "but what they're doing is illegal. You have the right to protect yourself, your assets, and your dignity. I'll help you gather evidence. We'll get your side of the story on record, and we'll fight back. They're not going to take you down without a fight." I left her office that evening with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. The next day, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to take back control, not just of my money, but of my life. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into being someone I wasn't. I wasn't going to let them win. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But this time, I was ready. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal appointments, strategy sessions with my lawyer, and endless phone calls. I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense that Nathan and Emily had already planned their next move. They were getting desperate. I could feel it like a weight pressing down on me. Their constant phone calls, their messages, their attempts to twist the situation, they had one goal: control. They wanted my money. They wanted my life. But most of all, they wanted to destroy my independence, to make me feel small, powerless, like I had nothing left but the crumbs they'd throw at me. As the legal battle progressed, it became clear that they had underestimated me. They thought they could manipulate the system play on my emotions, make me appear weak, mentally unstable, incapable of managing my own affairs. But what they didn't know was that for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself. I wasn't afraid to fight, and I was armed with something they hadn't counted on the truth. My lawyer, Sarah, was a force to be reckoned with. She had a way of cutting through the lies, exposing the real motivations behind Nathan and Emily's actions. As we gathered more evidence, more testimonies, it became increasingly clear that they were playing a game they couldn't win. My financial records, the gifts I had given them, the rent payments, the loans, and most importantly, my conversations with Sarah and the notes I had taken over the years, all of it painted a picture of a woman who had been manipulated, used, and emotionally drained, but not one who was incompetent. We filed the necessary documents, and every step of the process felt like a small victory. The legal system was slow, but it was working in my favor. For the first time, I was on the offensive. My lawyer made it clear that Nathan and Emily had no case. They had no legal grounds to claim I was unfit to handle my own affairs. And as we prepared for the final hearing, the one that would decide the fate of my future, I could feel the tension building. This was the moment. This was where everything would change. The day of the hearing, I woke up early, my heart racing with anticipation. I wasn't nervous, though. I was ready. I had spent too many years being afraid, too many years sacrificing for others, and it was time to take back control. The woman who had been so easily manipulated was no more. Now I stood tall, resolute and confident. I wore a simple black suit to court nothing extravagant, but enough to command respect. As I walked into the courtroom with Sarah, I could feel the eyes on me. Nathan and Emily were already seated across the room, their faces tight with tension. I could see the flicker of anxiety in Nathan's eyes, the same son who had once looked at me with love, now looking at me like I was his enemy. Emily sat beside him, her face a mask of indifference. But I knew better. I knew the truth behind her cold exterior. As I sat down, I glanced at the judge, a middle-aged man with a serious expression. He looked at the case files before him, then at me, then at Nathan and Emily. I could feel the weight of his gaze, but I didn't flinch. This was my moment. My moment to speak the truth, to tell my side of the story. The hearing began, and the lawyer Nathan and Emily had hired started with his opening statement. He tried to paint me as a woman who had lost touch with reality, a woman who was being manipulated by others, a woman who no longer had the mental capacity to manage her own finances. He claimed that my refusal to let them help me, my decision to cut off financial support, was a sign of irrational behavior. He used every trick in the book to paint me as unstable, to cast doubt on my ability to make decisions. But I didn't panic. I didn't crumble under the pressure. I stood up steady and strong when it was my turn to speak. Sarah had coached me, helped me prepare for this moment, but I didn't need her words. I had my own. I'm not crazy. I said, my voice calm but firm, echoing through the courtroom. I've spent my life taking care of my family. I've given everything I have, money, love, time. But I am not a machine. I am not an ATM. I am a person, and I deserve respect. My son and his wife used me. They took everything I gave, and when I finally stopped, they tried to turn the system against me. They're not concerned for my well-being. They're concerned about the money I stopped giving them. I paused, my eyes locking with Nathan's. He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. Emily, on the other hand, sat with her arms crossed, her face flushed with anger. But I didn't let it deter me. I wasn't backing down. I know I've made mistakes. I continued, my voice steady. I've given them everything I have because I thought that's what a mother does. But I'm not just a mother. I am a person. And I deserve to live my life without being manipulated. They want to take my dignity, my freedom. They want to control me, and I won't let them. The courtroom was silent, every person hanging on my words. I could see the judge scribbling notes, his brow furrowed. He was listening. He was hearing me. Next, it was Nathan's turn to testify. I could barely look at him as he walked to the witness stand. The boy who had once been my whole world now stood before me a stranger. His testimony was a rehearsed performance, a narrative designed to make me look irrational, to make me seem like the one who was out of touch with reality. He spoke about my erratic behavior, about how I'd become difficult and unpredictable after I stopped sending money. He even claimed that I had changed in recent months, that I had become someone he didn't recognize. But his words didn't have the power they once did. I had seen through his lies. I had seen through the facade of concern he had painted, and I wasn't afraid anymore. When Sarah cross-examined him, the cracks in his story started to show. She asked him how many times he had visited me without asking for money, and he couldn't answer. She asked him how many times he had really checked in on me, and again he faltered. She asked him about the wedding, and his discomfort was palpable. It was like pulling at a thread, and with every question, his story unraveled. By the time he finished, the room was heavy with silence. Nathan had exposed himself for what he truly was, a man willing to do anything, including manipulating the system, to get what he wanted. When it was Emily's turn, I could already tell what she would do. She took the stand with her practiced performance, playing the part of the worried daughter-in-law, but there was no conviction in her voice. She tried to paint herself as the victim, as the one who had been hurt by my refusal to help. But even as she spoke, I could see the cracks in her carefully constructed persona. She had nothing left but a facade, a story that didn't add up. By the time the trial was over, I was exhausted. Every part of me had been stretched thin, but I knew I had done the right thing. The evidence was in my favor. The facts were on my side, and I had one last card to play the truth. The judge retired to deliberate, and I sat there in silence, my heart pounding. It felt like hours before he returned, but finally he stepped back into the courtroom, his expression grave. I held my breath, waiting for him to speak. After reviewing the evidence, the judge began, his voice clear and firm. It is apparent that Mrs. Richter is fully capable of managing her own affairs. There is no credible evidence to suggest that she is mentally incompetent, nor is there any justification for the claims made by her family. The petition for guardianship is denied. The words hit me like a wave, and for a moment I felt as though the world had shifted beneath me. I had won. I had finally won. I looked over at Nathan and Emily. Their faces were a mixture of shock and disbelief, but there was no remorse, no apology. They were still the same people, still willing to fight, still trying to manipulate. But it didn't matter anymore. I had taken back my power. I had taken back my life. As we left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I was free. I had fought for my dignity, for my autonomy, and I had won. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Real hope. I was going to be okay. The battle wasn't over, but it didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I was going to live for me. I want to share something deeply personal with all of you. After years of sacrificing my time, energy, and money for people who didn't truly value me, I finally reached a turning point. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, saying no to my own son and daughter-in-law and deciding to put myself first. But that decision changed everything. It was a lesson in reclaiming my own worth, in realizing that love cannot be measured by how much you give, and that setting boundaries is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. I've learned that you don't have to keep sacrificing yourself to keep others happy. In fact, doing so only leaves you empty, drained, and unable to live the life you deserve. This journey hasn't been easy, and I know many of you may be going through something similar. Maybe you're giving too much, being taken for granted, and losing sight of who you are in the process. If that resonates with you, I want to encourage you to start setting boundaries. It's okay to say no to protect your energy and to take back control of your life. You deserve to be loved and respected, not just for what you give, but for who you are. You are enough. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you've been stretched too thin giving without receiving? What was your turning point? How did you regain control over your life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm eager to hear your stories and support each other. We're all in this together, and your experiences matter. Thank you for reading my story. Your attention and support mean the world to me. I hope it inspires you to stand up for yourself, to prioritize your own well-being, and to take back your power. You have the strength within you to create the life you truly deserve.